Well, joining me now is Dan Henninger from the Wall Street Journal, a Fox Business contributor. Dan, great to see you. Let's talk about that infamous fist bump everybody's been talking about this weekend. The president facing a lot of backlash about it. He was asked about it this weekend. Listen to what he had to say.
Do you regret the fist bump, Mr. President? Why don't you guys talk about something that matters? I'm happy to ask a question that matters.
All right, so the president wants to talk about something that matters, Dan, not the fist bump. So let's talk about something that matters. He went to Saudi Arabia. Everybody knows he went there in large part because we got to figure out something on oil. How do you grade him on that visit on the things that really matter?
Well, on the things that really matter, you'd have to say at best a D, like in Daniel. He did not do well at all. I mean, yeah, in some sense, the fist bump was a minor event, but it was of a piece with the whole hapless extent of the trip. This is a president who previously had called Mohammed bin Salman a pariah, and now he goes over there, does this fist bump, claiming that he then told MBS in a conversation that he believed he had killed Jamal Khashoggi, which the Saudis denied, and no one was able to verify one way or another. The whole meeting had gotten off to a terrible start. Now, presumably, the whole point of going over there to Saudi Arabia was because the price of gasoline is so high in the United States, and they were going to try to convince the Saudis to increase oil production. That did not happen. The Saudis said that that is a decision that will be taken by OPEC Plus. The plus, of course, being Russia. Yet another reason for the visit, which is to prevent the Saudis and the Middle East from getting too close to Russia, China, or Iran. He failed on all three counts. The Emirates are getting closer to Iran again. They're meeting with them. Putin is going to Tehran to meet with the Iranians. So there is really difficult, Brian, to see any deliverables that the president took home from this really difficult visit to Saudi Arabia.
And Dan, you think about what the world saw here. Okay, so forget about the fist bump for a second. The world saw a president who put himself in a position of weakness because of his own energy policies, going to Saudi Arabia and begging them for more oil, and Saudi Arabia really basically saying, there's nothing we can do. You think about that in the context of China. You think about that in the context of Russia. How badly has the U.S.'s stance on the world stage diminished because of the position this president has put himself into on energy?
Well, I would say the stance is diminished pretty significantly. I mean, think about who we're talking about here. Saudi Arabia, Russia, and China. If nothing else, these are countries that play absolute hardball politics. They're utterly bloodless about the political arrangements that they get themselves involved in. That is clear. And here was the U.S. president going over to talk to the Saudi prince about all those issues, but carrying very little credibility behind them. I mean, what must the Saudis think if the biggest political problem the president has is the price of oil, the price of gas, and they're not stupid. They understand what energy production is all about. And yet this is a president whose party refuses to take the steps necessary to bring down the price of energy in the United States. So I suspect they thought they were dealing with somebody who's weak in his own country, and certainly they were not going to give him much of anything in theirs.
Let's talk about weakness in his own country, Dan. Take a look at this survey from the recent Fox News poll. 52% of Americans worrying that inflation will become worse 1 year from now, not better. And a whopping 75% say they've suffered financial hardship due to inflation over the last 6 months. You know, Americans watch the president go to Saudi Arabia, come back empty-handed, really in some ways embarrassing himself on the world stage. That creates the kind of pessimism that causes people to look forward and say there's no end to the pain in sight. How much do you think this last visit, coupled with all of these economic issues, are going to matter when it comes to what Americans do in November at the polls?
Well, I think it's going to matter a lot. I mean, somehow this is a White House that purports a mystery to most of us, Brian, to feel that the American people don't notice what's going on right in front of their own eyes. I mean, the biggest problem, as the poll makes clear, is inflation, the price of energy, the price of gasoline, and the weakness of the economy. Now, at the center of that sits energy policy, right? And just this past week, when Senator Joe Manchin said he could not support the Democratic Party's climate agendas, which includes suppressing fossil fuel production, they went berserk. They went ballistic because they're not getting the policies they want for renewables, and now are demanding that the president do it through executive orders. The American people can see where the source of the problem is, and the source of the problem is really interesting, Brian. Down at the border, the Biden administration has basically no policy other than an open border. And now it appears that on energy, they have no policy either.
Yeah.
That's got to come back to bite them in November. You can't get away with a policy that amounts to nothing.
No policies, no solutions, and no end in sight. I think that's what Americans see, and that's where you get the pessimism. Dan, we got to leave it there. Always good to see you. Thanks for being with us.
Good to be with you, Brian.